The lights are a little harsher than in another venue.
I can't see the incoming.
I know. Last time I was here, I confessed to the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. It was just awful. So, I was worried that we wouldn't have anything to talk about after the events of the last
boring week.
But it seems that I was wrong. So the Drudge Report, which is reasonably friendly to Trump, yesterday put a picture of the Hindenburg explosion on the front page.
Subtle as always, yeah.
But if I heard you correctly on Meet the Press this morning, you have a somewhat different assessment of how the week went. So share it with us.
The Washington Post column today uses the headline, "It was a good week, it could have been a great week." And that's because I believe mostly that the Supreme Court matters so much more than anything else. I'll take a Supreme Court justice over 5 House defeats. And I explained it this way this morning to Chuck. If you have a portfolio of 5 stocks, and one goes up 400% and one craters, and the other 3 don't move, and we have the 3 more stocks of the military defense, the infrastructure bill, and the wall.
The wall.
The wall. And those are the big 5 for him. His Supreme Court legacy went up 400%. His repeal of Obamacare cratered. I value the former so much more than the latter that I'm just doing my happy dance. And if we get one more Supreme Court justice, the jurisprudence that I approve of, and may not be a majority view in the House, I gather, is going to be locked in for a generation.
Now, I want to stay with the court for a couple of minutes, and then we will circle back to what's going on. Because you were wholly behind Senator McConnell's decision to hold no hearings, Zippo, after Scalia died, with a year left in Obama's term. I understand. Tactically, that was a 10 strike, obviously, because you're going to get your court.
Yep.
On the merits, you were okay with saying to a president with a year left in his term, we will not even consider your nominee?
Not only am I okay with the merits, I invented the hashtag no hearings, no votes, which Majority Leader McConnell adopted. I like to think of myself as the co-adjudicator of that will. And I'm very happy with that because I do believe that if you get a vacancy in the last year, not in the year before, because Anthony Kennedy was nominated for a vacancy occurring in the September of the year before, you have to sit on it. When primaries have begun, you have to let the people decide, and you ought to have let, for example, I imagine if Secretary Clinton had become President Clinton, it wouldn't have been Merrick Garland, it would have been Gordon Liu, who is the Justice of the California Supreme Court, significantly to the left of Merrick Garland. So I really do stand by that, I believe it.
Now, look, when it comes to this argument, there's enough hypocrisy to go around, I think. Ted Cruz said last fall, when it looked like Clinton would win, well, we don't have to consider any of her appointments for the next 4 years. I take it you are not on board with that.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No.
So that, just to be clear, if, and I think this is highly unlikely, although a little less likely than unlikely than a year ago, if somehow the Democrats were to take the Senate, it would be okay for Majority Leader Schumer to block any appointment in the year of the campaign, but not the year before.
That's correct. And it's the Biden rule, actually. Joe Biden originally articulated it in the last year of George Herbert Walker Bush's 1992 term. Said if another one comes up in 92 after Clarence Thomas came up in 91, we don't have to move on it. Now, you pointed out the key thing. Hypocrisy reigns in the era of judicial nominations. Senator Leahy sat on every Republican nominee from 2001 to 2005, every single one. John Roberts was delayed his position on taking an appellate judgeship on the D.C. Circuit from 1999, was he originally nominated by President George H.W. Bush, 1991, until he was confirmed in 2005. And then he became Chief Justice thereafter. So both Democrats and Republicans have abused the system. We ought to go back to where every judge gets a vote. Every single judge, except in the last year, which has also been the rule, dating back to Abe Fortas, who you remember was nominated for.
But that
was a rush job, right?
No, that was a coalition of Southern Democrats and Republicans who didn't like his rulings on race and didn't like his rulings on obscenity and didn't like his rulings on criminal defense. I mean, that's what that.
But it turned out he was corrupt.
Well, that was that's a footnote that we didn't quite know till later.
Okay.
That is true. Okay, the reason that I bring this up is because I followed you in your tortures of the damned, trying to figure out what to do about DJT. Now, I researched this today, but I could be wrong. Here's how it seemed to me to go. You wanted somebody else to be the nominee. Then when he was the putative nominee, you said, all right, we're going to have to get behind him. Then you wanted the convention to not nominate Trump. Then you said, we still got to get behind him because of Hillary. Then the Access Hollywood tape came out and you said, he's got to get off the ticket. And then you wrote this column, I don't know, a night or two before, kind of despairing in a way, saying, I wish I didn't have to do this. Yeah. But
I was the only person at 30 Rock to vote for Donald Trump, and I'm the most reluctant Trump voter in the world. I will say, you're very close. When the debates were on, I was sworn to be neutral, and I was neutral, and you can adopt that and live by that. So through 15 interviews of the president during the radio, of 170 interviews with presidential candidates, I was as neutral as could be. After he was the nominee, I was for him. I became quite agitated when he attacked Judge Curiel, because I believe in the independence of Article 3 judges and that you don't attack people because of their ethnicity. And I said, if you don't stop this, I'm done. He did stop. He didn't repent. He did stop. And so I got back on the Trump train. Then the Access Hollywood came out, and I said, please leave the ticket. He didn't. When it became a binary choice, I voted for him.
Okay. So I either read a transcript or heard, who knows at this point in my life, you were on with Bret Stephens of the Wall Street Journal, and you made this argument, binary choice, Supreme Court for the generation, to which Stephens said, and I think he said, yeah, the problem I have is he's an existential threat.
Yes.
Now, in other words, what Stephens meant, I think, was if you look at his character, his temperament, his ignorance, his whole way of life, there are potential threats about a presidency that, for him, Stephens, a pretty strong conservative, dwarf even the court. But now he's had 65 days. Seems like about 8 years, but it's 65 days. Are the character and temperament questions less troublesome to you now? More troublesome? No change? Much
less troublesome because of the cabinet that he's picked. And I want a minute about this. I knew it was a friendly crowd. I'm reading a book by Thomas Ricks called Churchill and Orwell, and I want to put this in caps. I am not comparing Trump to Churchill. All right, so there we go. But in this, in 1936, 37, and 38, Winston Churchill was at the receiving end of more invective and more assaults upon his temperament and character than anyone in modern times because of his, not in the case of Mr. Trump, but because Churchill was involved in politics and he had ratted and double ratted on his party, as he liked to say. Anyone can rat, it takes some art to double rat. He was hated, and then he became the leader of Great Britain. I don't see Donald Trump rallying above 50% ever, but his ability to bring in Rex Tillerson when faced with a vacancy at the Department of State, he asked Robert Gates, who do you think I should have? And Gates says, try Rex Tillerson. That shows to me the executive, the developer who stands it up. And I will tell you, he's a New Yorker. He belongs to you. You folks made him. I'm from Ohio. I'm from California. He's of New York. But I have spent my legal life representing developers, and he is a developer, which means he is who he needs to be in whatever room he is for as long as he needs to be that person. I don't view him as temperamentally unsuited or in any way unbalanced at all.
Okay.
It's a really good crowd.
We're 12 minutes in.
I know, it's holy smokes.
I told you that they actually. But now I have to take on the role in a non-physical way of pushing them.
Sure, go ahead.
And it's best done in the form of a question. Do you think Donald Trump knew what was in the health care bill?
At least as much as President Obama knew what was in the 2,000 pages. Because nobody knew what was in the 2,000 pages.
I can't accept, I think that's just flat wrong. He spent months, in fact, the reports on what, you may not like it, but it's why he had to change his mind on the individual mandate. He went through this stuff hammer and tongs. I think Donald Trump did not, you know how...
It's a quite different question than you asked me.
No, I asked, do you think he knew it was in the health care?
And I said the same to the level of detail that the president knew. Now, President Obama had a good grip on many of the big issues, such as the mandate, whereas I doubt President Trump knew what the death spiral is. But a 122-page bill is a lot different than a 2,000-page bill, and repeal's a lot different than implanting. So to the degree that he was familiar with it, and I talked to Mick Mulvaney today in the green room, the president went through 30 hours of meetings on this bill.
And as you will see when you read Robert Draper's piece, what everybody who came out of those meetings said was, he doesn't know what's in the bill.
He just wants to know what other people wanted, right?
And then he would tell stories about him as a developer, and then he would tell how he won the electoral vote.
Yeah.
I mean, the point I'm making is, look, this is the part that I think, for someone like me who tries to step back from the ideological stuff, because I don't know what the hell his ideology is, he says to the country, insurance for everybody, lower deductibles, lower cost. He then gets behind a bill which flatly, 180 degrees, doesn't do that. And my point is, it circles back to Bret Stephens. When he said a week or two ago, nobody knew that healthcare was so complicated. Are you telling me that you heard that and said, well, you know, he's a developer, or did not that at some level think, what?
No, I don't. I don't ever think what. I'll tell you why. I can speak Trump. I have been talking to him for a year and a half in extended conversations through 4 debates and 15. He will sometimes leave out entire paragraphs, if not pages, of the thought process. When he said healthcare is complicated, he admitted to the fact that I had no idea the depth and breadth to which the kudzu that is Obamacare had infiltrated every aspect of our Medicare and medical delivery system, and how pulling it up would involve a root structure as broad and as deep as Manhattan. It's far more complicated than any development project I've ever done.
And you think Donald Trump is capable of either speaking or understanding what you just said?
He can understand it. He talks like a New Yorker, and so he would not ever...
Now you're in trouble.
No, he would never, ever put it that way, because that involved, you know, a series of sentences that built towards a conclusion and didn't involve no expletives and zero...
But forgive me, as Ted Koppel says before he puts
the knife in, the shiv, right?
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody who this isn't a matter of rhetoric or a detailed, you know, head note argument. It's that I think he thinks that he was pursuing a bill that fulfilled his campaign promise because he doesn't spend any time thinking about it.
Here's my question to you. I spent last week an hour with former President Bush, whose new book, Portraits of Courage, is out. So I went up to Bel Air, and he was staying in a friend's house. I sat down, taped an interview with him. And I spent my young years as a White House lawyer working for Ronald Reagan. In both the Reagan years and the Bush years, the left believed both men to be stupid, not to know what they were doing, to be run by their staffs, and to be inarticulate. And so when I heard for the third time these critiques launched at Trump, I am indifferent to them because I've worked for two men closely. I worked for Reagan, I worked with W. And I say to myself, the left is unwilling to admit the possibility that the conservatives communicate differently and get there.
All right. I happen to agree with you, particularly on Reagan and to some extent with W. The only president who ever quoted me was Reagan, because I wrote a book about the 80 campaign arguing this was a legitimate, in the sense of, it was a political victory, not a victory of a movie star. You know, he'd written columns, he'd done his own radio shows, he was wildly underestimated. But here's the problem with this, Hugh. There's an old story, right? A guy saying, you know, they said that Edison was crazy. They said that Fulton was crazy. They said that Jaime was crazy. Somebody says, who's Jaime? He said, that's my uncle, he's crazy.
He's crazy.
So I don't disagree with you about the particularly I think actually with Reagan, but I think with Trump, if I may quote or reference Bill Maher made a very sharp point about liberals who say this about every Republican. They cry wolf. They're all stupid. They're going to blow us up. The problem is, as in the story, sometimes the wolf shows up, and my concern from the very beginning about all this, about Trump, was not ideology, because, as you point out, he doesn't have one.
Right. That
if we were talking about any other Republican, with the possible exception of Cruz, there were personality issues, right?
Kasich.
Well, as one said about Senator Graham, even his best friends can't stand him. But with that exception, you had a conservative president, and you'd fight it out over ideological lines. I think we're talking about someone here whose temperament and character is something else. But
Counterfactual. The cabinet is the counterfactual. General Mattis is arguably the best prepared Secretary of Defense that we have had since George Marshall. Rex Tillerson, while he is not skilled in the diplomacy's nuances, ran a 70,000-person multinational corporation. I know Scott Pruitt very, very well. He's an extraordinarily bright constitutional scholar who will be very, very effective in doing what the EPA ought to legally be doing, not legislating beyond its writ. I know it's I just feeding out the meat now to the. Get them spun up.
Are you at all concerned that the second-level appointees?
There are none.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, there are none.
Does this give you a certain
Very.
concern?
This is the fact that General Mattis, now Secretary Mattis, and the White House cannot agree on a service secretary, a deputy secretary, or one assistant secretary, and that Rex Tillerson is alone at the State Department 4 months after the election, tells me the essential truth about Donald Trump. He's not of politics, and he had no team. When Nixon won, he had a group. When you were with Kennedy, how many people were part of the Bobby Kennedy entourage?
There was a government in exile.
Exactly, and Nixon had a government in exile, and Reagan had a government in waiting, not in exile, in waiting. W had his father's government plus new people. He arrived with 25 people from Trump Tower, and it's very hard to stand up a government. I know Reince very well. He's very competent. I think he could become, over time, another Jim Baker. He has that temperament. He's not ideological in the extreme. So the jury is out, and I'm very happy. I'll go back to it again and again and again. The Gorsuch choice is a masterstroke for me, worth the election.
So for you, if one of those people that you greatly admire, right, is McMaster part of that group?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh.
Well, McMaster, the National Security Advisor. So if one of those guys bolts and says, I can't do this anymore, that would give you concern.
It would, especially if it happened in the course of a foreign affairs. Look, we haven't had yet.
That's right.
President Obama's biggest two errors came in the failure to support the Green Revolution, which occurred beginning in June of 2009. He undercut the Iranian democratic resistance and thus committed us to this path that we're on today vis-a-vis Iran, which is, I think, existentially a threat to Israel and ourselves. His second greatest error occurred in the first year of his second term, which was the red line, which he did not enforce. And so you get a foreign crisis every first year of every presidency because somebody pushes you. If Mattis quits in the middle of that, I may be headed to Canada too, because that's a bad flare.
Okay. To the news of the day. Whose fault was it that healthcare collapsed? Freedom Caucus, the moderates, Trump says it's the Democrats because nobody signed up with them, which, unlike, of course, all the Republicans that bat the Clinton healthcare thing and the Obama healthcare thing. But who from your perspective, who gets the blame?
As I said on Meet the Press this morning, that half of the Freedom Caucus I now call the Area 51 Caucus. They believe in legislative...
Can you understand Area 51?
Area 51 is where all the aliens who crash on the Earth are taken and hidden by our government. There are spaceships and there are extraterrestrials. And so half of the Freedom Caucus believes in legislative spaceships that will descend to the contrary of the rules of the Senate and the procedure of the Senate and will make their will upon the nation. So they exist oblivious of the realities of the political terrain in front of them. They killed the bill. They did. And
now Trump tweeted out today, congratulations to the Freedom Caucus and the Club for Growth.
And the Heritage Foundation.
The Heritage Action, right?
Heritage Action.
It's the new heritage.
Right.
We don't care much about substance, we just want to raise money.
Yep.
Heritage. Now, there seemed to be an implicit or maybe not so implicit threat that, all right, maybe I have to go and find some Democrats to work with on this stuff. As we talked about before we came out here, if Donald Trump reaches out to Democrats, my assumption is he not only alienates the Freedom Caucus, but the much larger conservative Republican study group. Can he do this? Can he square the circle?
I do. I think he can. There is a bill in the Senate called the Collins-Cassidy bill, or the Cassidy-Collins bill. And if Lamar Alexander and Orrin Hatch, who are the chairman, respectively, of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Welfare, and Pensions, and the Senate Committee on Finance, talk with their counterparts, Patty Murray and Ron Wyden, and say, come, let us reason together, Trump will be all over that. That'll be a deal. And if the Senate passes a deal, the House will get rolled because Democrats will come over and join. Remember, Paul Ryan had 210 of the 242 Republicans signed up for a repeal and reform bill. If a Senate sends over a decent bill, and Obamacare is in a death spiral. I hate to give this news to you folks because people don't like to hear this, but it is completely collapsed. All of its major promises have been betrayed. You can't pick your plan, you can't keep your doctor, and 33% of the counties in the United States have one plan, and that's up from 7% of the counties in the United States in 1 year. So just do the math, straight line extrapolation. They're dropping like flies because of adverse selection. So we've got to save that, not for you or me, but for poor people.
I cannot, if this were Woody Allen's Annie Hall, I would bring out Ezekiel Emanuel and we would have an interesting fight, like he did with Marshall McLuhan, because I don't, an awful lot of people don't accept this, but
that would be funny.
No,
I'd get my hat handed to me.
But here's the, yes, exactly. Yeah. He's a pretty smart guy. He's the calm Emanuel as opposed to
He was at
Rahm.
the White House, by the way.
Yeah, I know. That's an interesting invitation. The brother of Rahm Emanuel, invited by Ivanka, I think.
Yep.
Okay. But here's one question.
Space.
One of the things about Obamacare, or ACA, whatever you want to call it, and by the way, it is interesting to me that 35% of the people who oppose Obamacare approve of everything as long as you don't tell them it's Obamacare.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you know what they wanted to do? They wanted to get rid of the pre-existing condition reversal. It's the one thing that's the most popular thing in America.
Well,
the Freedom Caucus is crazy.
Yes. I mean, it was like you say, what else can we do to hurt people, But, I'll just throw this one other thing to you. As I was watching him saying, but people will have a choice. And I'm thinking, you know what? They should go into the car business and market a car for $1,200. There's no brakes and the steering wheel doesn't work. You can have a choice.
Right.
Anyway, here's the question that I was trying to get to. A lot of when Ryan says Obamacare is around for the foreseeable future, it is also clear that the executive branch has enormous power to make that work or not. And it seems to me that, for instance, when they canceled all the TV ads around open enrollment, that was almost going to guarantee that enrollment would go down, younger people would stay away, adverse selection, premiums go up. So the question is it fair to say Obamacare is doomed if, in fact, the people charged now with implementing it, Mr. Price, among others, the most vociferous anti-Obamacare guy, can, if he chooses, do everything in his power to make sure it doesn't work?
This is what I call the anticipatory repudiation of failure argument, and it's very smartly put. To get it out there on the table early that the collapse of Obamacare, which is already underway, is somehow our fault. We've been there 65 days. It's
Do
been
not
in place
misrepresent
for 7
me.
years.
I was saying he has the option.
Option.
He also has the adoption to do everything he can to see if it works.
What he ought to do, and what I intend to explore with him, is to find ways to use the super regulatory power given to the Health and Human Services Secretary to put forward that which I think is the biggest solution. I ran the Federal Employee Health Benefits Program for 3 years, so I know a little bit about this. We need a set of national plans available to anyone, whether they're in Ohio or California, in Nevada or Alaska, that operate off of the old Blue Cross PPO model, whatever those cases may be, and to use his regulatory authority to put in what Donald Trump called erasing the lines, which I understood to be the interstate transfer and portability of a single plan that you can keep for your whole life. Price can promote that, and I hope he does. He can also use his regulatory authority to punish states that do not cap pain and suffering damages on medical malpractice cases. He can do a lot of different things. I don't think he's out to destroy healthcare. He's a doctor. I do think he is out to cabin, contain, and devolve Medicaid, which would be a very good thing.
I'm switching gears radically before I come.
Do I get to ask you a question, though? I wanted. You remember, you said I got one for every three.
Now, no, don't put words in my mouth. I said you could ask a question. And you know what? I could be done. That was a fake question. That was a fake question. All right, what's your question?
My question is, before we get too far away from Bobby Kennedy,
Yeah.
1968, were you on the campaign trail with him? Were you at the Ambassador Hotel? Because I woke up, Roman Catholic kid in Ohio, and everyone's crying, and we're all crying because it's a terrible thing. What was it like? Because that is as close to the devastation I can imagine of what the Clinton people felt on election night, only worse because it's a human tragedy. What was it like?
The first thing is the pros. I mean, I'm 24, right? I was not his senior consigliere, but there was a concern at the time that this was going to be a real uphill fight because Humphrey had all the delegates, sewn up that he'd never competed in a primary.
Well, you didn't think you'd won?
What I'm saying is it certainly wasn't like what it was election night for Clinton. It was going to be an uphill fight.
Okay.
I wrote I'll send you my book, Then Everything Changed. I wrote a 200-page alternate history going through all this. To be quite candid, when the news came that he had been shot, it was shocking, devastating, but it wasn't for a lot of the people a surprise. There were people who worried about this from the beginning. You know, his brother had been shot, King had been shot 8 weeks earlier. He drove in open cars, and the irony was that he was shot while he was trying to avoid crowds. But it wasn't, and you know, I've always thought that for me, the tragedy was he might not have been elected president, but he was a 42-year-old man who was trying to push the Democratic Party away from orthodox liberalism to a whole different kind of fusion of a more radical and a more conservative notion. I mean,
at 12 years old, I love the guy, and I still think it was the most, the pregnant moment that might have realigned politics, because he was pretty hardcore anti-communist. He was a...
Oh, no. He once said to his young aides, you know, I'm not running to be president of SANE, which was the anti-nuclear. He had very strong feelings about the Soviet Union, but he also, remember, had worked with them during the Cuban Missile Crisis to avoid World War III. He was I don't want to take us too far, but my favorite story about him and why I love the guy was he would go to college campuses. He would always like to challenge the audience. If he spoke to rich doctors, he told them, you guys are going to have to help pay to help poor people cover. But he'd go to college audiences, he'd say, who's for student deferments for the draft? I'm not. Whoa! Let me tell you why. And he'd go into the fact that you're not going, who do you think's going in your place? You're the generation that talks about justice, and who do you think's going? Poor whites, blacks, browns. And then one day he said, you know, when my oldest kid is ready for college, he's getting in no matter what, because his father's a wealthy and powerful man. And I thought, you know, that's a kind of candor, very unusual.
Yeah, he brought the A game, and it was.
Anyway,
it would have been an amazing campaign.
Let me, and in fact, it is true that a lot of people who voted for him in the Indiana primary wound up voting for George Wallace. Sure.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because the idea was we wanted somebody tough enough to handle this, and they didn't really care whether it was jobs in a program or running over demonstrators. I mean, I think that was part of it.
Well, they're still there.
I think that was part of it. So, okay. There is an extraordinary piece that will be in next week's New York Times that is online today. And I'm not trying to sandbag you, but
I was forewarned.
But Robert Draper, who's a very good reporter, spent endless amounts of time with Trump. And in this interview, Trump says, among other things, I believe I want to spend a ton of money on infrastructure. I want to prime the pump, a line I believe right out of John Maynard Keynes. So as a conservative with your Churchill tie, apart from the court, I mean, what part of Donald Trump's thinking in terms of public policy are you on board with? Are you on board with $1 trillion infrastructure?
No, I'm on board with, in the fourth way, the first chapter is devoted to how do you take Donald Trump's impulse to be a builder and turn it into a magnet and a machine of federalism. I've spent 18 years in Orange County on the board that Rob Reiner founded, the Cigarette Tax Board. Meathead founded it, where 50 cents a pack of cigarettes is given on a per capita basis to local people, in this case a board of 9, of which I've been a member for 18 years. We spent $500 million over 18 years to benefit children 0 to 5 to make them healthy and ready to learn by the time they're 5. So I have been about the business of building health infrastructure in Orange County, California for 18 years. We built dental clinics, we have built a center for autism and neurological disorders, we have built asthma clinics. We actually know public health. I've been doing this for 18 years. If he wants to give that money to local people and not bureaucrats, I'm 100% for it. If he wants to give that money to your mayor, however you might think of him, to do with whatever he wants at LaGuardia, I'm all for it. I do not want an infusion of money into unfunded pension liabilities for retired public employees in California, which has a $450 billion unfunded pension liability.
As a political matter, how does Donald Trump tell the Republican caucus in the House, I want to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure? They're going to buy into this?
No, they'll buy into a much smaller amount. He'll start at $1 trillion. I think he would settle for $100 million because I think he can accomplish 10 times as much with 1/10 of the money than President Obama did with $850 billion in 2009. But if he tries to do it from the top down, the Republicans will not give it to him. But they're politicians without earmarks. This is a terrible thing for a politician to be without earmarks. So if they gave each member of Congress, and I put this in the fourth way, a slush fund, and call it that. Here's your $50 million. Do with it what you will in your district. Every single member of the congressional delegation of New York knows what needs to be done in their district. I really believe this.
I also want to compliment you because you never say my book. You always say the title, which is what every
Fourth
good
way,
author does.
you betcha.
Excellent. A couple of, this is a byway. I think for this audience, I don't mean to speak for them, but the presence of a guy like Steve Bannon in the White House is a cause of great concern, as is, I don't know how to quite describe this, but you know, when people of my background hear nationalism, they hear other stuff. Mm-hmm. And when we see that there's a member of the White House staff who seems to have an odd affection for his father's neo-Nazi Hungarian group, that's a problem. And maybe it was an accident that they forgot to mention the Jews and the Holocaust during remembering the Holocaust. Do you think this is like unfounded stuff, that people are responding unfairly, or are there things that should give some people cause about just what this is?
I do think it has been overstated. By the way, for background, to the extent that it matters at all, my children's great-grandfathers that founded the temple in Indianapolis were the first Jewish general in the Union Army, Francis Knepfler, and the first Jewish admiral in the United States Navy, Edward Taussig, followed by the second Jewish admiral, Joseph Taussig. So I married into a Jewish family in part, and I'm very concerned about anti-Semitism and a very strong supporter of Israel. I do not believe there's a lick of anti-Semitic or racist bone in his body. He's a Manhattanite. He's the least homophobic president we've ever had. I believe for a matter of fact that Rick Grinnell will be named our ambassador to NATO within the next month. Rick will be the first openly gay ambassador to NATO, not just from the United States, but from any country in NATO since its founding.
This assumes we're still going to be in NATO.
That's very good.
I mean,
you know, he's done this a little bit. I was watching last night on TV. I knew I was in for trouble because Gonzaga was killing Xavier. So I turn over to CNN, and there's Jeff from the 80s anchoring every disaster that happened in the 80s when I was a kid in the Reagan White House thinking to myself, oh, God, he's going to slice me up like sausage tomorrow night. No, I don't. And as for Steve Bannon, I've talked to him once for 2 minutes to beg him to come on my radio show so I could explore with him as I do with you. What do you think? What are you doing? Turn me down. So I don't know him, and I won't comment on people that I haven't talked about.
Okay.
But everybody I know in the White House, Sean Spicer and Reince Priebus, are wonderful, extraordinarily patriotic people. Sean's been in the Navy Reserve for 20 plus years, serving his regular duty and his other tours of duty. He puts up with just maybe the most devastating parody on Saturday Night Live that has come along since Jerry Ford was played by Chevy Chase, right? It's just devastating. And he does it with a smile. And I tend to believe in the good faith of most everyone. I'll tell them the story I told you backstage. The last Wednesday of his presidency, George W. Bush had 6 talk show hosts back to his Oval Office. What a waste of an hour and a half when you have 6 days left in the Oval Office. I was one of them. The whole purpose of it was to ask us, would you please give the new guy a chance? It's a very hard job. W being extremely gracious and very concerned about how hard the job was. So we did. I don't think the new White House has been given much of a chance by the mainstream media. Now, they've asked for some of that themselves, but it's a blood sport from the day one.
we're going to get into that in a minute, but I cannot not ask about a very narrow question. Mm-hmm. Russia, what's up?
Well, Mattis understands Russia to be an existential threat. I work for Reagan, right? I'm an old Cold Warrior. I work for Nixon. I ghosted the book, The Real War, which was how to bring down the Soviet Union. Putin is Dick Cheney's a friend of mine, and he said, when I looked into the eyes of Putin, I saw a KGB colonel. That's my view, and I think it's the view of Mike Pence. I know it's the view of Paul Ryan. I know it's the view of Mitch McConnell. The president may want to work the reset that Hillary wanted to rework and George W. Bush wanted to rework, not realizing either of them that it's a KGB colonel. He's a KGB killer.
Do you put when I said Russia, that was a synecdoche, which is a city in upstate New York, by the way. What I meant also was, I trust you greatly not to let, kind of the Sean Hannity 4 legs good,
right.
2 legs bad. Do you think there is anything to the possibility that there was some kind of interaction between the Trump people and...
I do. I said on Meet the Press this morning, the president ought to call Director Comey on a conference call with other witnesses to ask him, is there anyone on my White House staff who is under investigation? If there is, they have to be separated from the White House. Because what brought down Nixon? Hyper-partisan people, not loyalists, but hyper-loyal people. If anyone is under investigation by the Bureau at any time in the White House, they have to be separated from the White House.
And that would, and it's interesting to me, Hugh, because if Trump were to do that, he would lance the boil about 90%. Mm-hmm. Unless, of course, it turns out that there was an entire operation designed to work with him. But of course, see, this is the part about Trump that, it would take so little to move him from the figure he now is to the figure that I think even people who wouldn't vote for him in a more general thing would like. We want a disruptor. We don't want somebody playing the same game. And it reminds me of a story that I was told. A woman told me about her mother at the end of this very long, very unhappy marriage. She said, we could have had a great life if only your father had been a completely different person. And the serious part about that is, I don't know who can go to the president and say, look, it's his daughter, is it his son-in-law, is it somebody say, it isn't, we're not asking you to not be you exactly, but maybe you could be a little less of you at 6:30 on a Saturday morning with your phone. And maybe you could once say, I may have made a mistake. Because this is, I'm not trying to filibuster, but this is to me the critical thing. Of all the qualities in a president, the most dangerous, I think, is a president who cannot acknowledge that he may have been wrong in a judgment and needs to change. Lyndon Johnson was one of the most stubborn people that ever held the presidency, but when Clark Clifford went to him and said, the Vietnam thing, it ain't working, he changed and abdicated. And when Gates or whoever went to GW and said, the Iraq policy has to change, he changed. These people. Who can go to Donald Trump and say, you have made a mistake and you have to change? And would he listen?
I assume, because of their relationship thus far, that General Mattis is one such person. And I'm quite confident that Mad Dog Mattis, a name he does not reject, will not be shy. But he won't do domestic politics. So what you're talking about is who can be his Haldeman, who can be his Dick Cheney for W's first term, who can do that? I don't know that we see anyone like that yet. And I'll tell you, here's the real problem. Selena Zito writes for The Atlantic, writes for the New York Post. She came up with the line of the year. The media and Democrats take him literally but not seriously. His supporters take him seriously but not literally. She has a new piece out in the Post today. She'll be on my show tomorrow. She went to Youngstown again. She always goes to Youngstown, which is my backyard. They don't care. They don't care at all.
That's right.
The Trump voters don't care.
Not yet. They may never.
They may never about what elite media thinks about him, and he listens to them, and until they say to him, change, he doesn't have to. And I believe, by the way, if you held the election again, he'd win every state again. Yeah. Every single state. Maybe not Michigan, it was close enough. But if you held it again without a change in strategy, because, do you guys know who Jim Traficant is? Do you remember him? He was my congressman, so that's where I'm from. He was a complete sledgehammer head, right? He had no ability whatsoever to understand a single issue, but he was against the man. Yeah. And the Steel Valley of Ohio is decimated, and they have an opioid epidemic, and Donald Trump tapped into that.
Well, if he ran the election again today, knowing what we know now, he'd lose because Jill Stein's voters would vote for Hillary, and some of the millennials would get off their ass and
You're
vote.
probably right.
Okay, but that's
I'll concede a little.
That's neither here nor there. But you lead me into one of your more impressive traits. You do believe that the media not only are overwhelmingly liberal, but don't recognize their biases. And you explore this with people from the elite media at great length on your show. And it occurred to me, watching the Gorsuch hearings, that I think you might be missing one point, so I will give you a chance to respond to it. Gorsuch came from an obviously conservative background. His mother was the EPA administrator. He signed up for all the. But he told us, when I became a judge, those political views, they're on a shelf somewhere. That's not how I rule. Now, I'm speaking personally. I was born to parents on the Upper West Side of the Hebraic persuasion. This tends to tell you something about the political environment from which I was raised. But I believe in the deepest part of my heart that when I covered campaigns, I put that aside and tried to judge campaigns. Now, if you think a judge can do that, why can't a journalist?
They can. They both do. However, this is when I teach a journalism class, I rearrange the class. They're all freshmen through seniors at University of California, Irvine. So, but everyone who's pro-choice, please stand up and move over to this side of the room, and pro-life move over here. And mostly they're pro-choice, so they move right. Would everyone who's in favor of same-sex marriage move further to the left, and they move over a little bit left. And would those of you who own a gun move a little bit to the right. So what I do is I physically divide the room so that I have the most liberal people on the left side. And then I say to them now, will the left side of the room produce the same newspaper that the right side of the room will every day? And the answer, of course, is not. They won't, because, to quote Dan Rather, news is where you look. And so, unfortunately, that is actually the way most of American media works because of self-selection. Instead of going off to make money, they go off to tilt at windmills and create things.
This example, if you did this to a group of federal judges, and you asked them to do that, would the people on the far left produce the same results as the people on the
Absolutely
far right?
not. And that's, in fact, self-selection. But the difference is, in the federal judiciary, President Obama just selected 363 judges, and before him, W selected 358 judges, and Donald Trump is probably going to select 250 because of the Reid rule is being in place, so he gets more of an impact. But we alternate, so that the newsroom ends up being half of the left and half of the right, which is pretty damn good for jurisprudence. But what will happen, unfortunately, with the filibuster, what Harry Reid did, this liberal crowd should greatly regret. He took the guardrails down on the judiciary so that really conservative people who are far to the right of me, I love to retweet when people call me a progressive just to get Joyanne Reid a little whiff of reality in my world. You people don't know the right wing till you do morning talk radio in the middle of nowhere, and then allow them to put on very hard left judges. We're going to end up with a judiciary which is at war with each other within 10 or 12 years, because the Democrats will win another presidency, maybe. I was on, by the way, question for you, Mark Warner, just an amazingly
You've already anointed him as the nominee.
The nominee, amazingly capable guy.
Here's my advice to a slightly younger man.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Oh, I love doing that.
No, I know. Everybody loves to do it, and it's ridiculous. All you have to do is go back and see, what the projections are.
I talked to him in the green room today. He wouldn't talk to me about it, which is a good sign that he's thinking about it.
Of course he's thinking.
You got to now, he's making a decision on whether or not to join the filibuster on Gorsuch. Mark Warner, who is a fairly moderate Democrat, would never ordinarily do that, but he has to do that if he wants to be competitive in 2020.
No, this is a particular issue that I think I'm puzzled about. I mean, from the point of view of what the liberals are doing, because they can't win.
They can't win.
I certainly, the way the game is played now, if the Democrats had gotten 51 seats instead of 48, I could certainly see Schumer going to to Trump and saying, here's what we're going to do. You draw up a list, we draw up a list. If anybody's on the same two lists, anybody else, good luck.
It's staying open as long as Merrick Garland.
Yeah, exactly.
You can nominate that Garland fellow if you'd like.
In fact, I think it was Peter Weiner who was in the Bush White House said we would have nominated Garland.
Well, I knew Pete pretty well. He's
maybe
wrong.
It was someone else.
Okay. He's wrong about that. He's a great judge. He is center left.
All right. But in terms of, when I look at a journalist like Jake Tapper, who I think is at the top of the game, very important. I'm pretty sure, unless my memory is wrong, his background, where he started out, was on the left. But he gave Obama in the White House fits. And I think a guy like Tapper does his job in the same sense you want a judge to do. He does not bring his politics into what he's looking at. I don't know what politics Shep Smith has. He's on Fox, at least for now. We'll see how much longer he lasts. But he's been very tough on Trump for dissembling, for lying. And so I covered Jesse Helms in 2 elections. I think Jesse Helms was the last unreconstructed racist in the United States Senate. And that's not a word that I use
Lightly.
But I mean, he actually wrote things about how blacks have natural rhythm. I mean, we are talking about. But when I covered him, I was trying to cover him, trying to explain, all right, what's the appeal of Jesse Helms, North Carolinians? And so I don't fully buy into your analysis. What I do think is troublesome is what I talked about at the introduction, that there are no places people go and say, yeah, all right, let's start with these sets, and then where we go. I mean,
That was great, was the debates. I was parachuted in as the designated conservative. Jake moderated 2 of them, Wolf moderated 2 of them, Dana Bash and I split wide right, and we got our touches on the ball. But CNN had to allow me into the room, and I had always, I had my preconceptions of what it's like to go into the CNN editorial room. They're all diligent, amazing professionals. They are all extremely hardworking. They want to do a good job. The question sets, they now go back and freely admit that what I brought were different question sets. The nuclear triad, the Ohio-class submarine, things that matter. I did not ask, as George Stephanopoulos did, who's a fine guy, and I've worked with him on ABC before I joined NBC, but he asked Mitt Romney, what do you think about banning contraception? If you remember the first debate in 2012. That wasn't on anybody's radar. And so I really think the problem is elite media doesn't have enough. It's changing in real time before my eyes with Mary Catherine Ham at CNN, with Guy Benson at Fox. It's changing in real time, but it's been way too long that people of my center-right persuasions, Nixon identified it, were not represented in newsrooms, and by not being represented, the question sets changed. Not the fairness. I think they're completely fair, but it's just news is where you look, what do you read, and are you aware of what matters most to my voters?
What mainstream journalists do you regard with particular respect or?
The big 3. I think the transition to Jake, Chuck, and John Dickerson is a very healthy one for Sunday morning news. I think they are all incredibly smart. And I put a great store in people who are well-read. And so they're always reading. And Chuck will occasionally come off with something which represents years of being a hotline reporter. And John Dickerson has been a beat reporter as well. You can't really reproduce this. I've never had this experience of where every day you have to file on precinct level data. And so you really get into the grime and the grit. Michael Barone was this way, where he can tell you what the voting pattern in Macomb County was in 1968, right?
Yeah, 1868.
Okay, so that is, those 3 guys bring that level of depth to their reporting. Dana is a superstar. And my pal Joanne Reed, she's just, I like to say there's a big difference between being rotten and being wrong. She's just wrong. And she's wonderful. She's great. She's just wrong.
Okay, let's see how much I crank up the tandem meter. Are there any particular well-known journalists that you hold in minimum high regard?
There are. I wouldn't mention them, though.
Okay.
I believe in graciousness.
All right. I'm going to turn to these questions in a minute, but there's one, I guess, substantive issue that is, I think, haunting people more and more, and that is what has happened to the working class in the United States over the last 15 years. The only group in America whose death rates are increasing are white, middle-aged, working-class people, I think mostly men. A new report a few days ago said overwhelmingly these are death by despair, suicide, alcohol, opioids. A piece, I think, in the Weekly Standard then took this further and said, since the year 2000, the economic and cultural conditions for tens of millions of Americans has declined drastically. Work has disappeared. The people who are out of work spend their time watching television and playing video games. Divorce rates, out-of-wedlock birth rates, all of these things are going through the roof. And oddly enough, I mean, less among the traditional victims of this, African Americans, whatever. Now the question is, and I wish I could remember it, is this an issue to which politics can speak? Is this something buried deep in the culture that arguments about policy just can't touch? Is this a spiritual crisis? You're a deeply devout fellow. What do you think is...
The Social Security Disability Insurance Program had 7,000 monthly recipients 10 years ago. It has 7 million monthly recipients 10 years ago. It has 14 million monthly recipients today. that is a diagnosis that depends upon a diaspora of symptoms that only a judge and a court can decide if you have, but a lot of this has to do with the big three diseases of despair. No, it is not something politics can solve. Yes, it is something that politicians can speak to and ought to. And I think part of the reason Trump succeeded is that the president said often, we need a cheerleader. We need someone to go out there. And he came to my backyard, Vienna. We call it in Ohio, not Vienna. It's Vienna. Everything's got a long I from Ohio, like Lima and Vienna, Ohio. He flew in to the Vienna airport, which is on the border of Youngstown and Warren, and 7,000 people went to see him. Now, John F. Kennedy finished his 1960 campaign there, and John Kerry finished his 2004 campaign in Warren, Ohio, and they had crowds of 2,000. Donald Trump drew 7,000 people. What is that? Those were not my Republicans. They were your steelworkers. They were your United Auto Worker people who believe they have been let down by an industrial policy. And Chuck admitted this. Whenever we talk about the demographic of non-college educated, the non-college educated hear us saying the dumb people. That's what they hear us saying. And that we don't mean that, but that's what they hear us saying when we talk about blue-collar people, and they're tradesmen, tradeswomen. And I don't know how you infuse them again with the sense that we really do care about you, because not a lot of politics does.
And see, before I turn this, that's one of the things that so puzzled me about the health care plan that has just gone down in flames. I think your description of what those people were voting for was dead on. That and in fact, somebody did some great reporting out of a small town in Wisconsin that over and over again, the people who had gone from Obama to Trump felt a sense of condescension toward everything they believed and lived in. Okay, so when you then offer a health care plan where a 64-year-old worker premiums go from $1,700 to $15,000 a year, 60% of pre-tax income, how is that person supposed to think, by God, I'm glad I voted for Trump. He really has my interest at heart?
Tim Ryan, a different Ryan, not Paul Ryan. Tim Ryan is now my congressman. He's 45 years old. He went to my high school. He's a good pal. He's a Democrat. He says to me last week, Hugh, if we take this away, do you know what happens in Trumbull County? We had 55 opioid deaths in February in Trumbull County. I said, isn't that an admission against interest, Tim? And he's a lawyer. You just admitted that under Obamacare you had 55 opioid deaths. And he said, yes, but you'll make it worse. And I said, no, we'll block grant Medicaid, and John Kasich will know what to do with the money. For the poor white working class and for the poor urban underclass and the poor underclass of any color whatsoever, the money has got to get to local people who know what to do with it, not to people writing checks from Washington. That's why it was preferable.
And one of the freedom...
Did I hear an intimation of a clap out there?
I think somebody was coughing. Yeah. Although it was interesting that one of the essential benefits that the Freedom Caucus wanted stripped out was coverage for drug and alcohol abuse.
Yes, they did. They wanted, but that problem is not a problem of the upper middle class or the middle class that is not insurable. It is primarily a problem of the lower class and the uninsured, and that is why you need a Medicaid program that does clinics and rehab, not emergency room.
So just when Kasich expanded Medicaid, he met with a few of us. He said, one of the reasons I can use this money for drug treatment. So he did the right thing.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what, by the way, I've said this publicly. I voted for Kasich. He's a friend of mine. He would have won overwhelmingly bigger than Trump. And he's a very masterful politician, and he may run again.
I like him because he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He has an expansive definition of fools.
The only person who beat up, I have a couple of Trump tattoos, but I got more Kasich tattoos than I got Trump tattoos.
I understand. Yeah. So I'm going to ask a couple of these questions, which are all polite. They are. Now this is pretty basic, and I don't, I'm almost... What evidence do you have to support the Republican view that cutting taxes on the rich stimulates the economy?
The Reagan years. The best example I have of the success of supply-side economics is the boom that began in 1982 with the cut in, Paul Volcker helped with this, of course, as well, an expansion that lasted through the dot-com bubble of 1991.
Well, I see your Reagan and I raise you Clinton. He raised taxes on the rich, and we had a much better economy after 8 years of Clinton than we did after Reagan.
By raising taxes on the rich, going to a marginal rate of 39.6% is not really raising taxes on the rich. What Reagan cut was from, I believe, 78% on the marginal rate, correct?
70.
70.
No, it was even less than that. It was Kennedy who cut them. It was 70 under Kennedy.
Okay, it was
not nearly that high.
You know, when we play around between 36 and 39, I'm indifferent to this. I don't really care. But you gotta make sure people keep half of what they make.
I guess the other one was when Reagan raised capital gains taxes as high as ordinary income, which is not too popular among your set.
No, I am in the New York Times Magazine one time, an interview on the back page, Why I Hate Billionaires. The concentration of wealth in the United States, in particular in Silicon Valley, is endangering democracy.
How about a few blocks from here?
Ditto.
Okay. I'm the east side. I live on the west side, so we don't. I don't count Central Park West. All right. So, but this is an interesting thing that you know this is the frustration I have, which is that you listen to the politicians talk. The blatherskate is so unconnected to reality. I can imagine some kind of reasonable coalition among thinking left and thinking right that says, okay, the concentration of wealth is too high. On the other hand, we do have the sclerotic administrative state that needs incredible flexibility.
Yeah.
One of the things I liked about RFK was he didn't believe in public housing. He went out and created a Bedford-Stuyvesant project that would put the initiative, local.
What did that do? I'm not familiar with it.
I will tell you about it after we.
Okay.
It was essentially an attempt to provide tax incentives for jobs and housing. And one of the things he did was every resident who wanted to participate had to put like $20 in the pot to have skin in the game.
Yep.
I mean, that's the kind
By the way, every successful public health program, for example, the Phoenix Neighborhood Christian Clinic requires a copay of even the poorest people in the community in order to have skin in the game.
Do you think that the fact that Trump has been the first president in 40 years not to release his taxes is that just picking on the guy, or don't we have a right to see what every president since Reagan has shown us?
I asked him that on the third debate. I asked him that on the radio show. I was the first person to ask him that in February of 2015. He guaranteed me that he would. In the third presidential debate, I asked him, and he got mad at me. In the fourth presidential debate, I went up to him during a break because Ivanka was not there. I wanted to know how she was. And so I said, Mr. President, not Mr. President, Mr. Trump, how is Ivanka? He said, I was really pissed at you in the last debate. I said, oh, well, how's Ivanka? He said, you know what? You like Ivanka more than me, don't you? And I said, yes, Mr. Trump, I like Ivanka more than you. And it's got nothing to do with your tax returns. He is very sensitive about the tax returns. I have no idea why.
Well, let's speculate.
No, I can't. I can't.
No, I mean...
There is no evidence on which,
sure there is.
Pages that came out.
Excuse me. Here there is evidence, and the evidence is that unlike every other candidate for the last 40 years,
I agree.
He broke a flat promise.
Now, to me, broke my promise.
I understand. Now, I understand about, you don't leap to conclusions. But as Bill Clinton used to say, if you see a turtle on a fence post that didn't get there by accident, I have no idea what that means. But you know what it means.
It means if you find a fork on Mars, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. There is no reasonable explanation for this other than that there is stuff in the tax return that would be very damaging to him.
Damaging? No. Embarrassing? Possibly. The only 2 pages we have showed that he paid a higher marginal rate than any of the presidents that we have seen. However, he may not have made as much money as he wants people to think he made. He may not have given much money to charity.
That we do know.
And he may have offshore. What killed Romney were the offshore accounts. And again, I go back to, you get what you pay for. That which gets rewarded gets repeated or avoided. Romney released his tax returns. Much was made of the Grand Cayman account, for which there was nothing controversial whatsoever. It's what every billionaire does. And what that teaches everyone going forward is, now we have, by the way, no one's ever going to release their tax returns again. They're not. No one is ever going to release their tax returns again.
Well, everybody did in 2016. All the Republicans did.
But going forward, he won. I didn't think you could win. I think going forward, they're not going to do it.
Okay. Does the travel ban violate the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
No.
Okay.
It just doesn't. And in fact, I teach a First Amendment seminar, and I try and explain the ability to control the entry and exit of people who are not American citizens has got nothing to do with the Establishment Clause. It has only to do with resident legal aliens and citizens of the United States. The power of the president is plenary in this area. The decision of the Ninth Circuit, the decision by the Hawaii judge, will be overturned with Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. I'm willing to bet all of my case books on this. It ain't even close. And by the way, there was a moment in the hearings, which was quite revelatory. When
the
Gorsuch hearings, where the senator from Hawaii asked him about korematsu, and would he apply korematsu? And he simply said, no. The United States confessed error. Solicitor General Katyal confessed error in that case. And she didn't know what to do, because it's the right answer, but it's never been overruled. But korematsu concerned American citizens. And what people need to understand is that if you're coming from abroad, we have an absolute right, for any reason whatsoever, to exclude you.
Okay. This is a question from someone friendly, well, to Trump. Trump's agenda regarding taxes and infrastructure is very necessary. Based on how the Health Care Act went, how do you predict the odds are for the above, and do you think Trump can save himself from himself?
Look, this is a very dicey week. The corporate tax cut is popular on both sides of the aisle. If he goes after, I wrote the fourth way, which I said for the seventh time according to the Frank Luntz rule, in large part to make sure he did not try and cut the home mortgage interest deduction or the state and local income tax deduction, for which everyone in this room is going to be very thankful, because I don't want to wipe out the Republican Party in the blue states. If you remove the state and local income tax deduction and the home interest deduction in the blue states, there will not be a Republican left standing, not even Elise Stefanik in upstate, not even Dana Rohrabacher or in Newport Beach, because they are the upper middle class's only tax advantage. A bunch of academics and Wall Street Journal Republicans love this. They want a flat tax. Nobody has ever campaigned on getting rid of the home mortgage interest deduction. The most eloquent guy on this is Rick Santorum, who wrote Blue Collar Conservatives, who comes from Western Pennsylvania, and is the son of Italian immigrants. And he says, I can't believe they want to take away the only thing that the middle class wants in America, which is to own a home. And I can't believe they want to tax New Yorkers more. Do they not want to ever have any Republicans ever again in New York? So I don't think that gets through. So I think it's crazy to go for tax reform next. But they don't talk to me.
What should they go for next?
A 350-ship Navy and an infrastructure build-out around a defense build-up. This was, by the way, why Reagan's economy boomed. We built a 590-ship Navy in 6 years in order to bring down the Soviet Union, and he's successful at that. We deployed strategic defense, the third generation of which now protects us from a madman in North Korea and the mullahs in Iran. And we should do the same thing. That's his infrastructure. Those are real jobs. You build a destroyer, there are a lot of people with hammers and welders going on.
This is a personal one. It's not personal. Trump was extolling a high-speed rail. He thinks it's great. What do you think?
I hate it. High-speed rail.
Get off the stage.
Yeah, Jerry Brown is married to my law school seatmate, Ann Gust, and Jerry was on Meet the Press today. Ann was not with him. Ann is the smartest person in California by a lot, including her husband. I've known Jerry Brown from 3 Jerry Browns ago. He fell in love with high-speed rail from nowhere to nowhere. If he had wanted to build it from LA to Vegas, I'd be with you.
You can't, you get no argument. Where is it, Bakersfield to Fresno?
Yes, there's just...
No, I understand, he's giving it a bad name, but the general notion, you remember there was a notion that they were going to do that in Florida, and I think Rick Scott said no. Do you think,
I took Acela today. If they will pass the language that says, notwithstanding any other law, including the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act, we shall spend $5 billion to improve LaGuardia in 2 years. I'd be all for it. But unfortunately, those 4 acts, Endangered Species Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, provide a regulatory maze which is suffocating American productivity.
Wait, did you say LaGuardia or did you mean rail?
I'll take both.
Okay.
Anything that is a major infrastructure investment that actually gets built,
yeah,
I'm in favor of. But unfortunately, high-speed rail is lost in $1 billion of paper in California.
No, I mean, I having taken it in Japan and all over Europe, you know, I would hope to see it, but it turns out you can't even do it. You can't run the Acela anywhere close to what it's capable of because the rail bed is too old, and you can't fix the rail bed without shutting down the Northeast Corridor.
Right.
So we're screwed.
Right.
Okay.
You could build it from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, which would have an economic boom for both cities and would be useful, but for some reason, Jerry decided not to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. Who do you think is the most influential policy individual around Trump today?
Oh, what a great question. Steve Miller. Hey, you asked me what it was. I'm not telling you I like it. It is Steve Miller, who was Jeff Sessions' policy aide. The Attorney General is probably the most influential domestic policy person, and I believe that foreign policy has been outsourced to McMasters and Mattis.
And he was a great blues musician, Steve Miller.
Oh, stuck in the middle.
Not the same guy?
Not the same guy.
During the campaign, this writer writes, I thought Donald Trump's work ethic was surprisingly intense. Now the reporting seems to be in the opposite direction. Now, here's an example to me, and it's a small one. But you remember that every time Obama played golf, Trump would say, what the hell is he doing playing golf? Yeah. He's been president 9 weeks. Today, I believe, was his 13th appearance on the golf course. Most other people, I think, would have a certain sense of awkwardness about this. They think this is Donald Trump, the New York developer. I don't give a damn what.
Yeah, that is who it is. But I also point, the flip side of that is not one story critical of President Obama was written about his playing golf, and we've had like 5,000 already of President Trump. I never once believed that it was wrong for the president to protect his family when he moved around the world, President Obama. For 8 years, I blew off all those commentary on how much money he's spending going to Hawaii, going to Martha's Vineyard, going to Spain. The president has to live their life. They have to, and we have to protect them. It's a tiny bit of the budget. We have to protect them. They weren't legitimate about Obama. They're not legitimate about Trump. The better critique of both of them is what George W. Bush said when he stopped playing golf 6 months into his presidency. Men and women are dying and in harm's way. I should not be seen on a golf course. I believe that is correct. But it applies to both of the Democrat and the Republican. The rule is in abeyance for both of them right now.
Well, here's an oldie but goodie. What is your opinion of a constitutional convention, I don't think they'd have to do it this way, to change the terms of House reps to 4 years and senators to 7? I didn't know about that. I think the question's about term limits. Put aside constitutional convention because you're into, political melodrama stuff. What do you think of term limits?
I hate them. I was for them, and now I'm against them. I was for them in California. They produce illiteracy, incompetence, and a lobbying class that is powerful beyond anything you can imagine. California is the greatest advertisement. Willie Brown, bring him back. Make him king of California, and it will work again.
He was the longtime Speaker of the Assembly.
Just a wizard. And he drove us crazy, so we passed term limits to get rid of him, much like we passed the amendment to limit a president for 2 terms.
I was going to ask you about that one.
I actually think the framers didn't put it in. I don't want it.
Yeah.
They were pretty smart. You can't beat Madison and Hamilton on governance.
No, I'm with you. I'm. A couple of people have asked, but I think you've kind of answered it. Is how do you fund a massive infrastructure program and cut taxes at the same time?
You can't. We're at $20 trillion in debt. The big bet, and we have to make a big bet, is that we were always wrong. That Republicans and Democrats were always wrong about American debt. Maybe we are such a player in the world that our debt doesn't matter, and going from 20 trillion to 22 trillion doesn't matter. The big bet, though, is interest rates, and there are people in this room, I'm sure, who know this better than I do. When that takes over on your debt service, very quickly the federal budget deficit goes crazy. But we've got a little window right now. Try and catch up. Try and spend the amount of money that needs to be spent.
I'm going to, having gone to law school and blessedly never had to take the bar.
Where'd you go?
Oh, yes. Indeed. I went to a little school in New Haven.
Are you a Yaley? They don't really
No, it was Moe's Law School.
They don't really... They don't teach the law there.
Of course they don't need it, which is why I never took the bar. It was Robert Bork taught me three.
You were an antitrust wizard, okay.
Pro-trust.
No pro-trust.
We called it when he taught it. No, but I
You think he should have been confirmed?
No.
It began the descent into confirmation hell.
I think what was said about him was awful. I think Ted Kennedy's speech was like one of the, a terrible moment. But no, I do not think he should have been confirmed. But that kind of leads into what I wanted to ask you about as a originalist.
Yeah.
Because I tried to ask Justice Scalia this once, and he responded in a Scalia-like way. Publicly. So I understand the argument that, look, you can't go making up rights. If it's got to be somewhere in the Constitution. Okay. So then we get this thing called the Ninth Amendment. And it says, I'm paraphrasing, just because we've listed these rights doesn't mean there aren't others that are reserved to the people. Judge Bork said that was an ink blot.
Yep.
But they had to have meant something.
They did.
What'd they mean?
They meant fundamental rights of the sort associated with the common law in Great Britain for a long period of time, like the right to raise your children, which was subsequently discovered, the right to privacy, which was subsequently articulated, and the right to raise your children as you see fit, which was subsequently enumerated in the face of the little Blaine Amendments, which were anti-Catholic through the 18th and early 19th century, 1900s. I'll say this, when we get down to it, Justice Breyer did me the great honor of coming to my studio. He's a wonderful man, he's brilliant. And he speaks like a Harvard professor. And I said, Hugh, the framers didn't know about the internet. They didn't know about television. I said, Mr. Justice, they knew about liberty. So I think they had this long debate for 3 days. No one paid attention to it because of the healthcare debate. It was fascinating between Gorsuch and the anti-originalists. And that was the same thing as with Breyer. They couldn't have known about the internet. They did know about liberty. And that everything, if we err on the side of freedom, works out.
So when Gorsuch was talking about the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, I think is like the hardest thing for some originalists to deal with, they don't seem to realize that 100 and some years ago, or 150, the country said to the states, there are things you can't do to individuals.
Right.
We never put that in before, but we really mean it now.
Yep.
So Gorsuch said the people who drafted the 14th Amendment may have been, they were racist, they were sexists, but the meaning of liberty is the meaning of liberty. And here's my problem with this. For roughly 100 years after the 14th Amendment, a significant minority of states banned interracial marriage.
Right.
16, I think.
Unconstitutionally.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now it comes up in 1967. And the Supreme Court unanimously says you can't ban interracial marriage. And by the way, if you want to be tricky about it, it treats the races equally. It says blacks can't marry whites, whites can't marry blacks. But the court unanimously found there was something about those laws that violated the 14th Amendment. I have to think that it's a tap dance of Fred Astaire-like proportions to pretend that that didn't happen because our understanding of equality has changed dramatically over 100 years.
Except the first Justice Harlan in dissent in Plessy said, the law knows no color. So some people got it right from the beginning. They were Republicans, by the way. And the 14th Amendment understood always that it was not about, that we ought not to have any distinction on color. The slaughterhouse cases eviscerated it, and it took us to 1954 and subsequently 1967 to resurrect it, and we're still repairing the damage. The one thing I would say about the Gorsuch hearings that this audience might be particularly happy about, and I write about in the book, if you read Chief Justice Roberts' concurrence in Citizens United, where he talks about what is super precedent. He doesn't use that term because it doesn't really exist. But when you don't overturn something, Judge Gorsuch kept saying, if people rely on a decision, if there are reliance factors, you don't overturn it. Same-sex marriage is never going to be reversed. Even if Donald Trump got 6 more justices and he put 6 more Gorsuches on, Obergefell will never be reversed.
But Roe might be.
But Roe would be.
And the reliance...
Not might, but the reliance damages that the states have got in their constitutions ample protections on reproductive rights where they are wanted, and other states do not want them and do not protect them.
One more on this. I don't want to turn this into a law school seminar, but I'd rarely have the chance to do this. So, and this will not be a stranger to you. So the Constitution, 8th Amendment, no cruel and unusual punishment. Yeah. First question, does it have to be both cruel and unusual to be struck down? No, I'm serious.
I know, I don't know the 8th Amendment well at all, but I will say what I can dimly remember of Crim Pro, and I don't teach it in my con law class, is that we do not have an answer to that we will know it when we see it, as Justice Stewart said about pornography.
Okay.
It does not go to fines, though.
No, but the question that always comes up, and even Scalia said he had a problem, branding was very common in the 18th century.
Yeah, and we're not going to do that anymore, right?
Well, presumably, if a state, said we're going to brand, I don't know what.
We would strike it down, yeah.
On the grounds that whatever was going on in the 1800s, we're different today.
We're different today.
So something has evolved.
There is, the living Constitution people are okay if they don't take it to the nth degree, as Justice Breyer does, that there are no liberty interests in the internet. There are. I mean, we're really geeking out here, and I'm sorry. But the whole controversy about broadband and about the regulation of the internet was anathema to me because we believe in the free dissemination of ideas, not superintended by the government in any way, shape, or form. And if you want to charge more or less, you ought to be able to. And the right to tax is the right to destroy.
Okay. This is one of the only audiences I would have done this with, by the way.
Yeah, well, they're very polite. Thank you.
They
Thank
are
you very much.
Many of
I'm
their
a little bit worried about leaving tonight, but
many of their children have become lawyers. I will tell this story. You know what a lawyer is?
No.
It's a Jew who can't stand the sight of blood. What can I tell you? So we're almost at the end of our...
I can't keep up with you. We got to be at the end of this. If you watched last night, he was being funny in the 80s, and so I'm really happy to have gotten to the end of 12 rounds still standing with Jeff. Go ahead.
But I always like to ask guests at the end a much broader question, which is, if we were to come back here in 5 years, do you think the country and the world will be better than it is now, worse, or will we just keep muddling along?
Nixon's definition of progress was the ongoing incremental expansion of liberty and literacy in a growing number of stable regimes either in or allied with the West.
You write that for him?
No. Oh. It was in, I couldn't tell you if I did, but it was in the real war. The incremental expansion of liberty and literacy in a growing number of stable regimes in or aligned with the West. Using that metric, we are not in a good place for the next 5 years because China is taking over the South China Sea with an aggressiveness that we are not in a position to countermand because our Navy is down to 272 ships. Putin is at least a Russian nationalist like we haven't seen since the Tsar, and possibly a throwback to Khrushchev. And there are lots of jihadis everywhere. And I wore my Churchill tie on Meet the Press this morning because there was a terrorist attack in London last week. And they have 8,000 jihadi plots in London, and not in London, in the United Kingdom. And Theresa May, who's a magnificent leader. So I do not see the incremental expansion of liberty and literacy in the next 5 years. And if you had asked me what do I worry the most about Trump, I would ask the president about very basic things like the nuclear triad. And it had not crossed his, now he would know about elevator shafts and how much cement a building costs and how you do a development, but he's never done national security. Nixon never did anything but national security. Bobby Kennedy grew up as Joe McCarthy's right arm, and then in the Cuban Missile Crisis, you mentioned, let's answer the second letter, not the first letter. It's like baseball. We were talking baseball back there. Either you're a baseball man or you're not. Either you're a football woman or you're not. You can't make it up. I can't pretend to know anything about soccer. He doesn't know a lick, nothing about national security things.
Well, see, now at the very end of this conversation, the kind of assurances in the first part of the conversation about math, now as you're about to make your exit, you're letting us know that there are things about this president I would suggest that are perhaps unique in the lack of focus on what actually is his...
That's why Secretary Mattis and General McMaster's matter so much. And if they were to depart, the flare would go up.
Yeah, and what really concerns me about that, it's an observation. Don't take the words literally, but Michael Dukakis once said about a Reagan thing, the fish stings from the head, and his campaign was proof of that, actually. But the point is, the reason that I think, in another of my alternate histories, that I think John Kennedy would have extricated himself carefully and cautiously from Vietnam, in spite of having precisely the same advisors that they later surrounded Johnson, was that he brought to that conversation a fundamentally different mindset than Johnson. He knew the area, he'd been there as a young man, he intensely believed in the power of nationalism to overthrow colonial. He believed Mike Mansfield when he said they hate us, they want us out. Johnson didn't care. Everyone around Johnson, same person, McNamara, Rusk, Rostow, Bundy, but the person at the top was what made the difference.
Said stay there.
And I think had there been a different personality at the head table during the Cuban Missile Crisis, no matter, same advisors, we might have had a very different result.
He brought them in. He knows what he doesn't know. The great strength of every developer that I've ever met is that they may pretend to know what they don't know, but inside they know what they don't know, and they bring in expertise because they don't want to lose their shirts.
And I've heard 3 or 4 different people, including Newt Gingrich at one point, saying the problem with Trump is he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And that is the part that most worries me.
We will see. I don't agree with him, but we will see.
This has been a terrific evening.
Thank you. It has.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.